Cracked Mirror by a Mad Painter, a.k.a. T.R. Becker. Susie May Flowers, really Amy Rose, but now known as Susie Johnson, poured her husband, Major Steve Johnson, a cup of coffee, who smiled up at her in the morning light. He was lucky to have her, he thought. If it wasn't for her, he would be dead now. She had put a stop to an experiment in time travel that would have cost him his life a little over 2 years ago. He was to meet with Colonel Mitchell Hamilton III at noon, and he was looking forward to it. He had never met him before. He was the head of a secret organization named Amalgamated Contact Organization, or ACO for short. Steve had learned about it when working with the physicist Jeffrey Burley. The AC was all about making contact with any peaceful alien civilization there might be out there. They were well funded, and from what he was able to dig up about them, they wielded real power in the space industry. They had some interest in Dr. Burley's work in time travel. This is when the organization had taken notice of him. Susie had been given the mission of watching Burley by being his secretary just a couple of months before she had met Steve. He knew most of it by now. She could not marry him without him knowing a little of what she was up to. The only thing he did not know was that she had an artificial intelligent assistant hooked right into her mind, named Alex. She had thought of telling him, but was not sure what he would have thought. Alex had been useful to her on many occasions. He was always connected to the internet. "Do you have any plans for today?" he asked her as she sat down across from him. "Burley is out of the country until the end of the week, so really I don't have to go into the office. Kim can deal with anything. If she's not, she will call." Kim Drummel was her secretary. "You can meet me for a late lunch. The meeting should be over by 1, he said hopefully. "We can see a movie, have a late dinner. We can call it a date." He smiled at her like a wolf watching a flock of sheep. "Only if there's dancing involved," she said. "Oh, there's dancing, that's for sure," he laughed. "You would think we were on our honeymoon still," she smiled. "As if you really mind." He had fallen in love with her almost overnight when they first met. Burley's time experiment had more or less worked, but it was not easy to understand how. It kind of made a new timeline by sending him 3 hours into the past. In doing so, he had aged 45 years and was almost dead when he was able to convince Susie to stop the experiment before it even happened, and in doing so saved his life. It was hard to wrap your mind around it. He had done it, yet she had stopped it from happening in the first place. Burley's experiment had worked, yet it had not happened, all at the same time. He really didn't want any more to do with time travel, from just what she had told him about his older self. At least now he knew he had a chance of 45 or more so years of life. He had not experienced a time trip, yet some part of him had. He was glad that in either case he didn't have to remember any of it. He made it to the American Embassy 20 minutes before he was to be there. He didn't want to be late. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The secretary kept looking up at him as if she didn't trust him. He couldn't blame her. This may have been the American Embassy, but that didn't mean this place was out of the reach of terrorists or a lone nut job. The phone rang. She picked it up, didn't say anything, and then hung it up. "The colonel will see you now," she said. He stood up, went to the door. As he entered, the colonel was on the phone and waved his hand at a chair for him to sit in, so he did. He was in his mid-60s with short white hair. He had the look of a politician, not a military man, he thought. "Thank you, Senator," he said as he hung up the phone and looked at Steve. "Well, it seems that senators don't like their fundraising dinners interrupted," he laughed as he reached over the desk and shook his hand. "I read your file and see you're no stranger to confidential assignments. Do you realize this one is a little bit different, right?" He was not sure what that meant. Sir, I don't understand. Assignments are orders that you follow no matter what. The colonel nodded his head. Yes, this one is, as I said, a little different. If you take this assignment, you will never again be under the orders of anyone other than me. He let that sink in a moment before continuing. I know you do have an idea of what the ACO is about, but till you agree, I can't say any more. He did know some about the ACO, and he was not going to have to think about it. That was for sure. He knew that there were aliens and that he could be part of an organization that was trying to make contact. He wanted in. Yes, sir, I fully understand, and I agree to take your assignment. The colonel opened a drawer, pulled out a file, and handed it to him. Take this home and read it, and sign where it's needed to be, and report back at 0600. Get some rest. It'll be a long day and one you won't forget. He smiled as he stood up. I believe that you will not only be a colleague, but we will become friends. They shook hands. Yes, sir, I look forward to it. First thing is no more sir. It's Mike from now on. He paused, then added, Oh, your wife Susie, or should I say Amy, needs to sign that too. He winked at him. The next 30 minutes on the ride to meet Susie, his mind was all abuzz with thought. How did he know who she really was? Was he also a part of Earth, Time, Heaven, and Energy Research, better known as Ether? Could they be as big as that, or did the ACO control them? There were many questions he needed answers for. They ate lunch. They talked about what little the colonel had told him about the new assignment, and if she was fine with the new development. She assured him that there was no problem. If he wanted the assignment, she would agree to it. She had no idea what Ether may say about it. She had not called Alex to find out. She had shut off Alex just before Steve had joined her for lunch. She enjoyed having Alex whenever she needed him, but her personal life was just that, personal. It had been hard to get used to having him in her mind, but now she would find it hard not to have him. She thought it would be hard to get along without him. They decided to put off the date night and just do a little shopping and make dinner at home before sitting down to read the file. As Susie was washing the dishes from dinner, she heard the ding of Alex wanting to talk to her in her ear. She touched her index fingers to her thumbs and said, Yes, Alex? I have been instructed to tell you to inform Steve about me and to expect the delivery of an assistant of his own. What? She was shocked. Ether now wanted to recruit Steve after 2 years? Did it take him that long to trust him, or was it the assignment? He thought she was just an industrial private eye, not an industrial spy. What was he going to think of her now? It is believed that his new position could help Ether keep an eye on ACO. They have remained somewhat hidden. So you want him to spy on a multi-governmental military organization which would put him to death if he was discovered? This is the only chance we have had to get someone on the inside of the ACO. It is believed there is a group calling themselves the Apollyon Warriors, and they are trying to infiltrate many government agencies around the world. She heard the doorbell go off, and Steve yelled, I'll get it. She walked into the living room as he came back from the door carrying a large envelope. Had to sign for it, he said, holding it up. She smiled at him. Dear, don't open that yet. We need to talk first. He looked confused at her. For the next hour, she told him all about Ether and Alex. She could not be sure by the look on his face what he thought. He just sat there saying nothing. You understand that I wanted to tell you about Alex from the start, but I had no choice if I was going to help make a difference in the world. He sat there staring at his hands, which were resting on the table in front of him. After a moment, he sighed and said, Well, I guess if it wasn't for Ether, I'd be dead and would never have met you. He smiled at her. They have you convinced that what they are doing is for the benefit of mankind, so I guess I'm in. He picked up the envelope and said, "Okay, let's do this before I change my mind." He was ready when he heard the ding in his mind. "Major Johnson?" It was a sweet-sounding woman's voice with a slight Australian accent. "I'm Kylie. I'm your personal artificial intelligence assistant. I hope we will become friends." "I'm sure we will," he said out loud, smiling at Susie. Susie smiled. "Okay, we're going to need some ground rules around here, I think." Susie was not sure if she was going to like it. It was not just him, her, and Alex now. There was a new player that she would have to deal with. "Susie, just to let you know, now you'll be able to talk with Steve or Kylie whenever you want with my help, and the same with him. He will be able to speak with you or me," Alex informed her. For the next 20 minutes, Kylie filled Steve in on what Ether would like from him and what Ether was all about. What both were unaware of was the fact that what they were being told about Dr. Benadere was not the truth. He had no idea that Ether had spies anywhere. The truth was his artificial intelligent assistant named Alice was setting this all up without his knowledge. The four of them spent the next couple of hours going over the files that the Colonel had given Steve and signing it where it was needed. There really was not much in it to tell them what he was going to be doing for the ACO. It did say that he would answer to no one but the Colonel or the President. He liked that idea, and he no longer had to wear his uniform. He woke at 0500. Susie was already in the kitchen making coffee. She handed him a cup as he got out of the shower, still dripping. "You'd better hurry if you don't want to be late for your first day on your new job," she smiled. As he was heading out the door, he asked her how to activate Kylie just to make sure he understood, which he did. Before he cranked up his car, he said, "Kylie, I hope you and Ether know what you're getting me into." "Oh, yes, sir. We also know you will do fine at this." He was going to enjoy hearing her voice, he thought. It was almost as nice as Susie's. "I'm glad to hear that," she added. "Oops," he thought to himself. "I need to take care of what I think and when." He made it to the office in the embassy within 5 minutes to spare. The stuffy secretary handed him a note with an address on it saying to meet the Colonel there, and she went back to her work. The ride didn't take him long. He was able to pull right up in front of the old building. It looked no different than any of the others on the street. There was no sign on it to say what it was. He pushed the door open into a large reception room. The inside had the look and feel of a museum. There was a bleached blonde young lady sitting behind an old oak desk. She looked up. "Mr. Johnson," she smiled. "Mr. Hamilton is expecting you. Go on in," she said with a deep Brooklyn accent. She pointed down the hall. The hall ended at a door with a big brass plate that read, "Mitchell Hamilton III" cut into it. He rapped on it before opening it and entered. "Come on in, Steve. Have a seat. I'll only be a minute," the Colonel said from behind the desk that was as big as two of the secretaries. He sat as the Colonel went to the filing cabinet in one corner of the room, pulled out a large plastic ring-bound book a good 3 inches thick. He laughed a little as he handed it to him. "Each page is a verified sighting or contact across Europe in the last 6 months." Steve's mouth fell open. There had to be over 700 pages in the book. "All of them verified?" he said surprisingly. "Yes, each and every one." He sat back down as the bleached blonde entered carrying a tray with cups and a canter of coffee. "This is Tina Bellamy, my secretary and bodyguard." He smiled at her as she set the tray down on the desk. In his head, Steve heard, "Watch yourself with that one. She's a Sheila with a love for her work." He was sure that Kylie meant the bodyguard part. "Nice to meet you, Miss Bellamy," he said. She smiled with almost perfect teeth. "Ah, no, miss, just Tina. I'll let you boys get back to work, and out the door she went. She really does a good job around here. Care for a cup of coffee? He nodded yes, as the colonel poured himself one, then he handed him a cup. The coffee was hot and was American at least. We have you an office just down the hall. You will have to hire a secretary and bodyguard. Tomorrow we have set you up a couple of interviews with a few we think you might get along with, but for now Tina will get you set up. He pulled a card out of the desk drawer, set it on the corner of the desk. This will let you in the back door. We park under the building. That way no one knows who's here. We have a few entrances. You will learn them all in no time. We are proud of our ability to keep secret and to be well hidden. Maybe there was a lot more to the ACO than he knew. He had been on a few assignments that will never be known that he was involved with, but that never bothered him. So being part of the ACO was not a big deal. Well, I hope I could be of assistance to you, sir. I told you, no sir, it's Mike now. As far as the world is concerned, we are a consulting business and we are well established. He smiled at that. I'm sure we are, but what is it that we are consulting? There are a few files in your office that you will find to fill you in on what our cover is all about. He looked at his watch. Look, I have a meeting in about 10 minutes or so. Tina will show you to your office. Just then the door opened as if on cue and she stood there. I'll get back to you after lunch. Check out the files. They shook hands and he followed Tina out. The next 2 hours he read one file after another and was amazed by most of what he read. His office was just as big as Mike's, and for some reason it felt as if it fit. The files about his cover were easy to understand. Mike and him were the owners of Amalgamated Consulting Organization based in Houston, Texas. Kylie, what do you think of all this so far? He thought, looking at one of the UFO reports. From what I have seen on the net, there could be something to all this. I have analyzed thousands of pictures and read as many eyewitness testimonies, and there are many that cannot be explained. What do you think of the few I've read in the ACO reports so far? Only one of them has been on the net. The rest I have not heard of until now. Just then there was a knock on the door. It opened, and Tina was there carrying a wooden box. She walked to the desk and put it down. This is your new best friend, and you are required to carry it. He looked at the box and then up at her smiling face. Care for a cup of coffee? She asked. Yes, please. She turned, went out the door, as he pulled the box over in front of him and opened it. It was a handgun, a type he hadn't seen before, but only in the movies. It was a Walther PPKL, not the one that Bond had. It was a better one. This one had a lightweight aluminum alloy frame. It was no .357 Magnum that would rip a man apart. Instead, it used a .22 long. It could kill, but was made to stop a person for the most part. And it was straight shooting. He was good with firearms and had earned a couple of marksman awards when younger. In the box was also a shoulder holster, so he removed his suit coat and put it on. He added one of the clips into the pistol and put the other in his inside coat pocket. Each held 12 rounds. There was more than enough to protect oneself. You would think they'd give you a ray gun, Kylie said. Then they would have to train me. This I can use. He held it up as he cocked it and set the safety, smiling to himself. He slid it into his holster and straightened his jacket as Tina returned with his coffee. Ah, thank you. Don't get used to it. You'll have your own secretary soon. You got 6 interviews tomorrow morning. Mr. Hamilton asked me to apologize for him. He has been called away. She saw the box was now empty as she set his cup down. The PPK fits nice. You can't tell it's there. Hopefully it would just stay right there, he said. Yes, hopefully. There was doubt on her face. Mr. Hamilton said you can stay or you can take the files home to read. Just be back in the morning for your interviews. The first one is at 9. Thank you, Tina, he said as she went out the door. I still think you need to keep an eye on that one, Kylie said. There's something about her she didn't like. Believe me, I'll be careful with that one. That is for sure. She reminds me of a panther on the prowl. He closed the box and put it in the bottom drawer of the desk. He gathered up the files and went home. When he got there, Susie was sitting at her computer watching the chat on her website, watching the Abyss. It was one of the biggest sites on the web. Ether had first contacted her to leak information out about the Large Hadron Collider at CERN. Her team had done a great job in doing this, and her site had grown because of it. He threw the file down on the desk next to the computer. I have homework. He bent down and kissed her on the top of the head. Anything new with your site? It would seem that someone has leaked the fact that someone at CERN is working on time travel, she smiled. I wonder who that could be. I thought Burley had stopped that and went to work on a dimensional shift for use in space travel. He did, but you know how long rumors take to make the rounds, always growing as they do. Now they're saying they had to change our timeline or we would have been hit by Planet X, killing us all in 2012, she smiled at him. I don't know about Planet X, but if what these files talk about is true, then you might better start worrying about becoming a slave or lunch for some little green men. He took off his jacket and she saw the gun. Is that why you're now armed? Just in case they try to abduct you, now you're an ACO spy, she said as she closed the laptop. He smiled, patting the gun butt. Ain't no alien probing this guy. The four of them spent the next few hours going over the files. All of them were amazed at one point or another. The ACO had been around for almost 30 years and had 9 countries working together, all under Hamilton and Steve. He was not sure he was going to like having that much power. You'll do fine, Steve, he heard Alex's voice for the first time in his head. Ether is here to help guide you and to help you to understand what needs doing. Thank you, but that doesn't help much. But it's nice to hear. He looked over at Susie. Takeout kind of night? I'd say Chinese? He asked. He didn't have to ask. He already knew it was yes. That night he rested little, tossing and turning, and when he did sleep it was full of dreams that he was unable to remember. He had no trouble finding the parking entrance to the underground parking space, and after showing his card to the guard, he was able to find the elevator that opened into the hallway where his office was. He went into his office and texted Tina the code, "I'm in," to her computer. His mind was still a little fuzzy. He put the files on the desk and sat down as the door opened. It was Tina who carried a cup of coffee. Last time you'll have to get your own secretary to get you coffee. By 1400 he had interviewed 6 women, all of who had known the job was for ACO, each having worked in other departments. Each carried their own file. There were only one that he took a disliking for. The rest seemed fine. It would not be an easy choice to make, but he knew he would know before the end of the day. Tough choice you have there, Kylie said, almost a whisper. Okay, go on. Who did you like? He knew Kaylee wanted to say something during the interviews, but she had not because he had not asked. Number 1 was pretty, but I don't think she could defend you well. 2 is a straight-up control freak. 3 should be a teacher somewhere. The other 3 were fine, but Jenny Thompson is your best match. He picked up her file. She was well qualified for the job. 6 languages, 10 years in special services, and easy on the eyes. I think you're right. I'll email the others and give Ms. Thompson a call to report in the morning. She sounded pleased, he thought. He did like having her around. He just had to remember to think and not talk, or someone would think he was losing his mind. He thought about one of the case files he had read. There was a case about a cabin by a small lake near Wingen, France, where an old couple had been terrorized for a couple of weeks by a UFO that was coming and going into the lake each night. Others in Wingen had seen the lights in the night sky, but none wanted to talk about them. One night the lights stopped, and 2 days later they found the bodies of the couple. It was not pretty. They were drained of blood, and an organ or two was missing from each one. Another report told of a group of hikers that were hunted. There was one that had made it out alive but had to be institutionalized. There were reports after reports just like them. This type of report would be covered up in any way needed to keep it out of public thought. It was one of ACO's jobs to make sure that no really shocking thing got out. He was not sure how he felt about this. After all, he wanted to make contact with peaceful aliens, not become a man in black. The file had said that this was dealt with by a group that was under the Navy, so his job would only be as overseer. This still did not help. Just knowing that they were out there stopping information from getting out was a little unnerving. The ACO classified their files under 3 ways: friendly, unfriendly, and unsure, each having subcategories. He was given a password to let him into the computer system, and before he realized it, it was 1,500 hours. Tina buzzed him and saying she was locking up and going home. He was amazed by what he had access to. There were files that went back to the 1930s, ones that only the ACO had knowledge of. Whoever the Navy's men in black were, they did a good job. He wondered where Mike was. Did he get called away from what Tina had said? But he had not said anything to him. He was not sure if he should be worried or not yet. He was not sure of what was normal around there. He was jerked away from staring at the screen by Kaylee's voice. "Susie's sending word. If you ain't home in 20 minutes, your dinner'll be cold." He looked at his watch. It was 16:30. "Tell her I'll be there, please." He had forgotten that Kaylee was reading everything that he was seeing. "Have you heard of any of these reports?" "Most no. ACO is good at what they do. I will tell you, I find all this a bit disturbing and don't know how to process the fact that this information is mostly openly ignored." "Yes, it is disturbing," he repeated. He could understand that for most people it would be hard to handle the information that aliens were real, and some of them didn't care for our well-being. He sure had a lot to think about that night, so he was really not much company for Susie. By the time he reached his office the next morning, he had made a few decisions. He noticed that Mike had not come in again. First, he welcomed Jenny Thompson to the team, giving her the files she would need to read, and sent her back to her desk. Then he called Tina and asked her to get a hold of the head of security and bring him to his office. She let him in a few minutes later, and he told her to stay. The head of security was a heavy-set, elderly man named Humphrey. He didn't look too happy he was made to leave his office. "I have a couple of questions for both of you. First, where is Hamilton?" Humphrey shook his head. "I have no clue, and I'm not sure that I could tell you if I did." "Do you understand who I am? I'm your boss. If that's not a reason to tell me what I asked, then maybe I should replace you now and save me a headache later." He looked at Tina. "You're his secretary and bodyguard, yet no clue where he is?" She looked a little nervous. "I'm only his bodyguard when he's here. I'm not his babysitter." Her Brooklyn accent came through hard. "I must say he normally does tell me when he's going abroad or will be gone for a few days." "Okay, as of now I'm taking over till we can find him. Tina, you and Jenny check with all the researchers' heads and find out if he's working." He looked back at Humphrey. You get a hold of all senior agents, put them on the lookout for him. If you have to, go to his house and check it. Report back when you know something." Humphrey nodded his head and went out. Tina said, "Mr. Hamilton had a call to a senator at 1100. Should I reschedule?" "Yes, put everything on hold until we find out what was happening." She left the office. In his head he heard, "Tina acted concerned, but her body language showed me she knows more than she is saying." Before he could answer, Jenny came in carrying a cup of coffee for him. "Tina said you wanted a cup." He had never asked for a cup. "Thank you. I do realize this is your first day, but I must ask you to just do what Tina asked. But please keep an eye on her." He tried to make a smile, but it was far from the mark. "I want to know everything she does. She may know more about what's going on than what she's telling us. I assume she told you what's going on, right?" She nodded. "Yes, sir, and no worries. I keep an eye on everyone." She smiled. "Even you, sir." She turned and went out. He knew he liked her for some reason. "Kylie, can you check the net and see if there's any CTV footage of him?" "I'm ahead of you. So far, no luck. It's as if he never left the office." She paused, then added, "Maybe you should have a look at his office." "That's a great idea. I think I'll do just that." He was not sure why he had not thought of that. This is not how he would have thought his first week at work would go. Tina didn't like the idea of letting him into the office, but she did as she was asked. He told her to go back to work and went in alone, or almost alone. Kylie was always there. He looked around. Nothing seemed out of place. It looked the same as it had the first time he had been there. He was sure that the cleaning crew had been in last night, so he was not sure what he thought he might find. He looked at the books on the shelf. They looked like props, not ones that he would think Hamilton would have read. They came with the office, just like the ones in his. He sat down in the desk chair and looked the room over in the way Hamilton would have seen it. Still, nothing he saw stood out to him. "What do you think?" "I find it strangely impersonal," Kylie answered. Yes, she was right. There was nothing that showed this was anyone's office. He stood up and went to the bathroom door. When he opened it, the first thing he noticed was the smell of ozone. The second thing was a full-length mirror on the back of the door was cracked. The top left corner was broken off but was still in place under the frame. The crack ran down and moved in a little and then dropped down about a foot more. It had the look of it having happened recently. Could it have anything to do with the disappearance? "Kylie, can you see anything that I can't?" "I can see there's a kind of distortion in the light reflection." "I'm not sure what it is yet. You should consider getting a physicist to take a look." Great, he only knew one. That was Burley. "Kaylee, ask Alex to have Susie call and ask Burley if he could come to take a look." He was not sure the man had time to mess with a missing persons case, but it being Hamilton, he may make the time. He looked over the rest of the bathroom and saw nothing out of the ordinary. Susie said Burley will be there in about an hour. That made him feel a lot better. He locked the door on the way out, stopped and told the women that Burley was on his way and to call him when he arrived. He went to his office and called Humphrey. There was nothing new. No one knew where he was or had any idea where he may be. He spent the next hour just thinking. All of this was strange. If he had been kidnapped, then why no ransom note? If he had just left, why did he not tell Tina, or had he? Why had he not told him he was going to be gone? What was the cracked mirror? Had it happened in some kind of struggle? He almost jumped when Tina buzzed him, saying Burley was there. When he stepped from his office, he heard a cling of metal on the marble floor and Burley's voice. "Damn, I think that thing is expensive." Burley was standing there with both arms full of things. He smiled when he saw Steve. "Well, my good friend, where should I set up?" Both the women looked confused as he led him into Hamilton's office. He tried to help, but Burley said he had it. "I must say I'm happy you came. I have known Mike a long time. We don't always see eye to eye, but he has been a good friend." He looked at him. "He has helped me get funding, and without his support, we would have never met." Steve opened the door and showed him the mirror. He took his glasses out and put them on and began to look over the frame. He waved his hand and said, "Go on now. I have this. I'll let you know what I find." When he left, he asked Jenny to call ahead and run to the deli to get them lunch and have it put on his tab. All this thinking had made him hungry. He didn't bother to go to his office. He just sat down in the lobby. He really didn't want to be alone and didn't trust Tina alone at the moment. The only lead they had was a mirror, and may not even have anything to do with Hamilton's disappearance. He hoped that wherever he was still alive. When Jenny returned with his lunch, he rapped on the door and went in. Burley never heard or seen him enter. "Professor," he looked up at him puzzled. "We have lunch out here." "Do the ladies know what's going on?" he asked. "Not about the mirror. The rest, yes. I would not care to let them know what you're up to yet. I don't know who is behind any of this." He was pretty sure Jenny had nothing to do with any of it, but Tina could. Even Kylie seemed not to like her much, but that didn't mean she was guilty of anything. He had checked her file. She had worked for ACO for many years, and for the last 6 with Hamilton. She was not married and didn't show much interest in dating. She was just acting too cool with all that was going on, as if any minute she knew Hamilton would walk into the lobby. When lunch was over, Steve and Burley went back to the office. Burley had set up a couple of instruments, all pointed at the mirror. There was a laptop on the desk that Burley went to. After a moment, he looked up and said, "Well, I have found something a little strange. The frame has its own magnetic field." "What is strange about that?" he asked, thinking of a lot of things were magnetic. "Well, the first and most obvious is the frame is made of wood." He smiled. "It's only a millionth of Earth's, but it's there. What does that mean?" He rubbed his chin a moment and said, "I have seen this type of field before. I just can't remember where." His fingers began to move on the laptop faster than Steve thought an old man could move. "Yes, that's it. I know I had seen it before." Wow, Steve thought. Wood that is magnetic. How could this even happen? In his head he heard, "This is a little above what I know of physics." Kaylee's voice sounded a little uncertain. "Do you believe he has any idea what he's doing? He did, after all, almost kill you one time in the past." "Yes, but I did volunteer. Without him, I would never have met Susie. He will always be grateful for that." "Okay, did you know why it's magnetic, or how it could be magnetic?" he asked. "As I said, I have seen this type of magnetics before. It has to do with what's called the bridges that connect the galaxies to each other. I believe that mirror," he pointed at it, "has come across one of these bridges." He was saying that the mirror was not from Earth, but from some other galaxy? "Are you sure of that?" "This would explain the field and the distortion and the reflection. This just may have something to do with the way Mike disappeared." "Are you saying that the mirror is like the one from the book Through the Looking Glass by Carroll?" Burley kind of laughed. "Well, it's not magic, but it's a doorway, one that goes to another galaxy, or I believe it was, and I may be able to open it again if you would like me to." "Could that be where Mike went? Through the mirror doorway bridge?" "Maybe, But even if not, this is a great opportunity to learn about how a gateway could work. This is proof that it does, but we only have been able to teleport a proton or two across the room so far. Steve said, I'm only wanting to know what happened to Hamilton, not set scientific precedents. Maybe we'll do both, Burley laughed. Burley said it would take him an hour or so to set up what he thought would repower the light gate, as he called it. So Steve went back to the lobby. He decided to tell the women what was going on. They sat and listened, not saying anything. He was not sure they believed what he was saying. Tina finally spoke. You think Mike went through this light gate then? It was the first time she had called him Mike, and he thought he could see worry on her face for the first time. He told him it was a possibility, and really the only way to know was to try and get it going again. So that was what Burley was doing. I'll say, if this is my first day as the normal around here, I'm not sure I want this job, Jenny laughed. This made him smile. It was only his third, so he knew what she was feeling. He was not sure how long they waited on Burley, but it was longer than an hour. They began to hear a humming coming from the office. A moment later, Burley poked his smiling head out and waved for Steve to join him. All three of them stood up. Not without me, you're not, Tina said firmly. I have more a right to know what's going on than you. I've been with him for years. That was true, so he saw no reason not to let them in to see what was going on. It took him a minute to take in just what Burley had built out of the stuff he had. The laptop was now on a tripod in front of the mirror. There were wires running from it to some other box on the floor, and then there was a wire run to the top of the mirror frame. It was something the size of a briefcase with meters of some kind hooked up off the bottom of the frame. The meters were clicking and had lights flashing away. Burley said with a little pride, Look in the mirror." Steve turned to look, and his mouth fell open. There was no longer the reflection of the office. It was replaced by a moving fog that was a little transparent. He could see something behind the fog, so he took a step forward. There was a figure in there, he thought. In his mind, he heard Kaylee say, "It's Hamilton." So this is what happened to him, he thought. He was just walking back and forth in the room that he was in. "It's Hamilton," he said out loud. This turned out to be a mistake. From behind him, he heard Tina yell, "Mike, my love!" She pushed Steve and rushed at the mirror. Her foot hooked on one of the wires. "Oh, my love!" she yelled as she fell headfirst towards the mirror. It happened so fast, nothing could be done. Her head hurt the surface of the glass, but didn't stop. She kept going. Steve was pushed into the tripod with the laptop. He tried to sidestep, but it didn't work. He hit it and it fell over, pulling the wires loose as it hit the mirror glass a second after Tina passed through. The mirror cracked into a large spider web. The reflection of the office was back. There was a little smoke coming from the now mangled laptop on the floor. The three of them stood there staring at the mirror for a few minutes before anyone could talk. Now not only Hamilton was gone, but now so was Tina. He had no clue how he was going to explain any of this or who he was going to explain it to. The next few days was a big mess and took a lot of work for Jenny and him to clean up. It turned out there was only one person he had to report to, and that was the president, who instantly promoted him to colonel. He was to continue running the ACO as he saw fit. He wanted Burley to take the mirror back to his lab and to keep reporting to Steve about what he learned. He was going to have to find his own second in command now. He wondered if Burley would be taken into ether now. If so, then Susie could be freed up to join the ACO. She would make a great second in command. Ether not only had a man on the inside, but was going to be helped to run it. "So, Kylie, what do you think of Tina now?" he asked when he was wondering if Hamilton felt the same way as she did. "I have come to the conclusion that I may never understand human emotions." "Well, join the club. I don't understand them either." They may not have been able to save Hamilton and even lost Tina, but they had learned more or less what had happened. There was no telling if it was on purpose or accidental. What happened to Tina was accidental. He had figured her all wrong. She was a woman in love, and there was something he just didn't understand.